Cryptids can terrify the bravest among us, and that means even folks who consider themselves experts. Ever thought you saw something glittering in the distance, but your eyes were deceiving you? Well, Stella's experience took place on September 2nd of 2022 back in Chicago. She went out onto a balcony and she was looking in the distance and saw this weird large tree. It was about like 20 feet away, and one of the branches on the tree was bowing pretty heavily, but there was nothing there that could have made sense for it to be having weight. So as Stella was staring at the branch and trying to make sense of what was going on, an intense feeling of dread and fear came over her, as if every part of her body was screaming at her to turn around and run, but she didn't know why. And at that very moment, the branch that she had been observing began to shake violently, and despite everything still screaming at her to leave, curiosity had now gotten the better of her. So she started to move along the railing to get a bit of a closer look. A small form began to glimmer on a branch, and as Stella continued to watch in shock, a transparent human figure that shimmered a yellowish white color developed. She snapped out of her fixated stare and quickly took a step back from the railing, realizing finally that maybe this is something kind of scary. The shimmery being eventually dropped out of the tree, landing behind a man who happened to be walking past at the time. Now this guy spun around, his reaction similar to somebody who had been struck from behind, and was kind of confused when all he saw was a cloud of smoke. Oh right, the shimmery thing had disappeared in a puff of smoke after hitting the ground. Now Stella was like, okay, I'll wait around, let's see what happens. Nothing came back. Thankfully for her, at the same time, another neighbor just a couple floors below had observed exactly the same thing. And when those two conferred, they were like, okay, what's going on? Thankfully, they also managed to track down the guy that was walking past, and between the three of them, they were like, okay, he felt something on his back, I saw something, you saw something, what is going on here? Oh, and they also all confirmed that they were feeling that weird, overwhelming dread. Up north we go next. We've got an aquatic cryptid in Vancouver. So Taylor Wallace is a private investigator based out of BC who was hired to find the evidence of a person that had gone missing without a trace. And all he found, after more than a 6-year investigation, was evidence of large clawed creatures that could very well be consuming people. The photos he has provided as proof show a large claw print in the sand that was found, among others, next to a seal without its head that he discovered in 2016, a large claw print cut into some solid stone found in 2022, a cave made by something with large claws that has a red fluid-soaked entrance with a red claw print on the cave wall above it, and 3 separate scat samples from a large animal, believed to be one of these mysterious creatures. Oh, and also what possibly could be a human fingernail? So the area where all of this was found in was a couple hundred feet around a lake from a public beach, and there were dozens and dozens of large claw marks coming out of the water and onto the shore in various places that really didn't belong to any kind of water creature that Taylor could identify. And he's gone to this beach many times and is constantly looking for and gathering more evidence. Sadly, he has found another seal that was missing an important body part, and copious amounts of evidence of a large aquatic creature that's coming out of the ocean on a daily basis to feed on seals, ducks, and migrating snow geese. So not only are there large digs and claw prints in the hard ground everywhere, which were obviously made by a creature with some crazy claws, but the remains of all these dead other creatures are everywhere. While coyotes are the largest predators in the area, Taylor's never seen one in that park, and also the claw prints don't match up in really bad evidence. In a nearby park, Taylor's also collected more scat samples, and also one that might have traces of human evidence. And he's like, maybe this is from the human that he's been looking for that's been missing, so he can stop looking for that human. Also, very coincidence-wise, he's found evidence of these creatures in locations where people have gone missing without a trace. Do you believe in fairies? Now, while most folks like to think of them like helpful beings with multicolored hair, stunning wings, the reality is not all sugar plums and sweetness. American soldier Sam Barrett comes from a long line of military personnel, if we're talking expertise. Currently deployed on a peacekeeping mission, so the location of the story is kind of anonymous for safety, but the current climate where he is always raining or foggy, for context. So one night earlier this year, while retrieving a cache of buried weapons, he and his platoon noticed some lights in the forest that were kind of far away. They were about 10 small lights, all moving pretty erratically. Now another member of Sam's group began to hear what sounded like 2 people whispering in a language nobody could understand. And it was very quiet at first, but it started to get louder until it sounded like they were whispering right next to his ear. Soon, about 10 more voices joined in on the whispering, and they were all talking at the same time. The men began to panic. They were like, oh, maybe these lights are a distraction, which apparently that was a common tactic used by the local enemies. And they're like, uh-oh, ambush. So Caleb, a teammate and good friend of Sam's, suddenly started speaking loudly, which is not what you want to do in this situation. It seemed as though he was trying to communicate with his father, who had died 2 years earlier, and he dropped all of his belongings before running towards the lights. Now Sam was like, okay, my buddy's lost it, or maybe there's mind control going on. Now, fearing for Caleb and worrying like, yo, you're a dummy, you're gonna give up our position, he chased after him. But Caleb kept repeating, I'm coming, father, as he sprinted towards the lights. Well, as they got closer and the lights got bigger, Sam found it odd he couldn't really make out any definition, like there was nothing behind them. They just looked like lights floating in midair. Now Caleb was on his knees with his arms at his side. He was praying in front of these lights. And he was in like a trance, and Sam tried snapping him out of it, but he was like, nope, my father, the lights, the lights. Now eventually the commander of the team showed up, looked at everything, and was like, uh-oh, the fairies have him. Caleb eventually passed out, and the lights disappeared almost instantly. After being carried back to the base and returning to consciousness, Caleb had zero recollection of what happened. And not just for the evening. The entire day was a blank. Terrifying. We can't have a cryptid list without Nessie. For the uninitiated, this is the preferred nickname of the Loch Ness Monster over in Scotland. Spottings of this girlie go all the way back to 565 AD, making her a pretty grown woman at this time. Tied with Bigfoot for the most common cryptid being spotted, she's very popular, but also very much a recluse. This most recent spotting is from earlier this year, and in early March there was a Nessie enthusiast who couldn't believe what he saw when he was monitoring a webcam video of the lake from his home. 2 separate clips captured something stirring in the mysterious depths close to shoreland lodges near Fort Augustus on the loch's southern shore. Now our expert described that he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It all happened so fast. In the first video clip he got, something moved on the surface for a couple of seconds, and then he saw 2 shadowy wakes moving in 2 lines under the surface, moving to the left approximately 15 feet before disappearing. Now the expert estimates that the wake was roughly 6 to 8 feet long, and the water was way too agitated for the disturbance to have been caused by a fish. This was the first confirmed sighting of Nessie in over 7 months, which kind of broke the drought of Nessie news. Hey, maybe she just wants to hibernate. Finally for today, a tale of the metogamy Bigfoot. So this tale begins about 20 years ago, when our anonymous narrator purchased property on the lake. It's a pretty common cottage and vacation spot. He had grown up spending summers in the area, and he's very knowledgeable about wildlife noises, which very important. It was about 9:15 at night, right when darkness was starting to take over. He and his wife were sitting by the fire, facing like all the woods on their property, and they were like, okay, let's go inside because mosquito bites were brutal. He was staring at the fire alone when he heard what he described as about like 3 whacks around a kilometer away, and didn't really think about it much until about 15 minutes later when he heard the sound again. But this time it was closer. Now originally he was like, okay, maybe it's a moose hitting their antlers against a tree, but it didn't make sense for what time of year it was. Being able to barely see through the tree line, he heard the noise again. And yes, another 15 minutes. This time it was closer once again. He didn't really have anything to protect himself with, so he bolted into the cottage. And the whacks came again, even closer. Now, he never heard them once he got fully inside the house, but they kept happening at night over the next so many years. Now, if you're wondering, okay, maybe it's just somebody pulling a prank, his property is water access only. So any random strangers aren't gonna come all that way for a prank. Well, that's all for today, folks. I've been Alexa. See ya.